I'm a 28-year-old woman, and until 2 years ago, I would have told you I had a close relationship with my family. Not perfect, we had our fights, our bad moods, our weird traditions, but nothing that ever felt serious. We showed up for birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners. I thought that meant something. I thought we had love underneath all the noise. Then I got into a car accident, and everything changed. It happened just after a late shift. I was driving home, stopped at an intersection, waiting for the light to turn green. The next thing I remember is the sound of metal crushing in around me. A drunk driver had blown through the red light and hit the passenger side of my car hard enough to flip it. I woke up in the hospital with a shattered leg, torn ligaments in my shoulder, and bruises across half my body. I was lucky to be alive. Everyone told me that for weeks. They also told me to rest, recover, not push myself. That lasted a little while. I had to move back in with my parents after the accident. I couldn't live alone during recovery, and my apartment lease was up anyway. They said yes without hesitation. I used my disability stipend to help with groceries and paid a portion of rent. I also picked up small freelance projects when I could, just things I could do on my laptop. I didn't want to freeload, and I never asked them for more than they offered. In the beginning, they were sweet about it. My mom brought me meals without asking. My dad installed extra railings on the stairs. My younger brother even helped me rearrange my room so I could reach everything without bending or climbing. I cried more than once from relief. It felt like they had my back. That lasted about 3 months. Then, little things started slipping. If I asked for help down the stairs, my mom would sigh first. If I asked my dad to drive me to an appointment, he'd hesitate, then act like I was being dramatic for needing a ride. My brother went straight to open mockery, joking about how I should get a bell to summon people, or how I was playing disabled when it suited me. One day, I was struggling to reach the microwave, and he walked past me muttering something about natural selection. No one said anything to him. The worst part was my birthday. I hadn't planned anything. I was in pain, still walking with a cane, and just wanted a quiet dinner. I assumed we'd do the usual family thing. That night, the house was empty. I called my mom to ask if they were running late, and she said they were at a steakhouse across town. When I asked why I wasn't invited, she said, "We didn't think you'd want to come. You're not exactly fun right now." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I overheard my parents talking in the living room. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just gone to get water and paused on the stairs when I heard my name. "She's exhausting," my mom said. We all tiptoe around her. It's like living with a ghost that needs help getting dressed. My dad said something about how I was dragging the family down and that we weren't built to handle this long term. I stood there for a while after they went quiet, holding my glass of water with shaking hands. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. I felt like I was living on borrowed time. The final straw came from my cousin. She called to ask if I was still using my air mattress. Her friend needed one for a camping trip. I said sure, but asked about the upcoming family reunion at the same time. She went silent. Then she told me they hadn't invited me because there wouldn't be proper accommodations. That's when I found out my sister was going, with her new boyfriend, who had only met the family twice. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of anyone. I just stopped trying. I became quieter, less involved. I kept conversations short, didn't volunteer information. I started noticing how much better the house ran when I wasn't around. The silence was easier for everyone, so I gave them more of it. 6 months after the accident, I qualified for subsidized housing through a city program. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I packed my things and told my parents I didn't want to be a burden anymore. No one stopped me. My brother didn't even come downstairs. In my new apartment, I finally exhaled. The quiet was mine now. I started therapy. My therapist helped me understand what had happened, not just the accident, but everything that followed. She said I wasn't just grieving my body. I was grieving people who were still alive. That sentence stuck with me. I started reading posts online, stories like mine, families that couldn't handle a loved one becoming less convenient. The comment sections were full of people who'd lived through the same thing. People who were cut off after getting sick, disabled, unemployed. It wasn't just me. That's when I got an idea. I printed some flyers and reserved a room at the public library, adult estrangement support group, for anyone who feels abandoned by the people who should have stayed. I expected no one. I even brought a book to pass the time. 3 people came. One had a service dog. One said her family still tells people she died. One left her foster home at 16 and never looked back. We sat in a circle, shared snacks, cried a little. Then we laughed. Then we made plans to meet again. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The support group met every Thursday evening in a quiet room at the back of the local library. At first, it was just the 4 of us, me, the guy with the service dog, the woman whose family pretends she died, and the girl from the foster system. We sat in a circle of folding chairs and took turns speaking. No pressure, no expectations, just space. Then we started growing, slowly at first. One week, a woman in her 50s showed up with a printed flyer in her hand. The week after that, a teenager with a therapist's referral. A couple came in after seeing one of our signs taped up outside a laundromat. Soon, our group had more than a dozen regulars. What surprised me most was how few of them were disabled. I'd expected others like me, people whose lives had changed after illness or injury. Instead, most came with different kinds of stories. One man had been kicked out after coming out as gay. A woman in her 30s had grown up in a high-control religious group and hadn't spoken to her parents in 12 years. Another man had simply been forgotten, never invited, never included, until he stopped trying. We created a small ritual. At the start of every meeting, we passed around a notepad. Each person wrote down the worst thing their family ever said to them. Then before we left, we burned the papers in a small ceramic dish one of the members brought in. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple way to let go of something. Then came the sign-up sheet. The library asked us to start keeping a record of attendees for scheduling purposes. So I placed a clipboard on the table near the door each week. People added their names and emails if they wanted meeting reminders. One week, I picked it up like always and froze. There were several new names. One of them was Kelsey Tran. My hands went cold when I saw it. Kelsey had been my sister Sam's best friend all through middle and high school. I hadn't seen her in almost a decade, but I remembered her clearly, especially one summer night when I found her crying in our backyard. Sam had dragged her to a party, ditched her without a ride, and left her stranded miles from home. Kelsey called our house sobbing. I helped her inside, gave her water, let her sleep on the couch. The next morning, Sam barely looked at her. I didn't know what to expect the next week. I watched the door, wondering if it was really the same person. She arrived 10 minutes after we started, taller with shorter hair now. She looked around the room, calm and confident. She didn't recognize me. She sat near the back and listened quietly as others shared. Then, when it was her turn, she spoke up without hesitation. She said her ex had isolated her from her finances over the course of 2 years. When she finally reported him for coercive control and financial abuse, her parents told her it was unnecessary drama. They cut her off completely when she testified against him in court. That was 3 years ago. She hadn't spoken to them since. After the meeting, I caught her by the elevator. I introduced myself. When she heard my name, she tilted her head and asked if I had a sister named Sam. I nodded. Her eyes widened. Then she laughed, a little stunned. She said she hadn't seen me since I was 15. We ended up going to a coffee shop nearby. We talked for 3 hours. She apologized for not recognizing me sooner. I told her she wasn't the only one who hadn't thought about me in years. She asked if Sam had changed. I told her what I knew. My sister had become more polished, more successful, more curated. But no, she hadn't changed. She still knew how to make people feel small. That conversation led to more. She joined our weekly meetings. A few weeks later, we launched a private Discord server for people who couldn't attend in person. Kelsey helped organize it. She had a background in mental health admin, so she knew how to keep things structured and safe. She added rules, set up mod tools, created channels for different topics, coping skills, resources, general chat. Over the next few months, a few people from nearby towns reached out, wondering if they could start their own branches. I helped them get started, slowly and carefully. We added a video call option for those who wanted to join virtually. Kelsey offered to host the first online meeting. 26 people showed up. Then one afternoon, she messaged me, said she'd been thinking about something. She asked, "What if we invited people who know our families but don't know us anymore?" I didn't answer right away. She sent a follow-up, not to shame them, just to show them what they missed. The idea stuck. I didn't know where it would lead yet, but I said yes. We started drafting a plan. Things were moving fast, but for the first time since the accident, it wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about building something new. The list took 2 days to finish. I sat on my couch with a notebook and went name by name, cousins, neighbors, former teachers, people from church, friends of my parents who had once given me birthday cards. I skipped anyone who had already taken a side or disappeared after the accident. This list was for people who only knew my family's version of things, people who thought I was just going through something, or who heard I'd become bitter and difficult. I wanted them to see something different, not through a fight, but through an open door. The message I wrote was short. I said, "You once knew me. I'm hosting a support group for people navigating family estrangement. We've started welcoming observers, people who may want to listen, learn, or just sit in. No pressure. You're welcome to attend. It's not a debate or a call-out session, just a place for stories." I sent it by email, one by one. A few bounced back. Old addresses, probably. Some were opened but never responded to. A handful unsubscribed immediately. One former babysitter replied with a paragraph about how sad it was to see me dwelling in drama. I deleted it without replying, but 5 people said yes. At the next meeting, I was halfway through rearranging chairs when my cousin Ray walked in. I hadn't seen him in person since the accident. We'd grown up close. He was 6 years older, but we used to play video games in the basement during family cookouts. After the crash, he went quiet. I assumed he just followed my parents' lead. He didn't say much when he arrived. Just signed in, sat near the back, and listened. During the introductions, he gave a small wave but kept it brief. No big statement, just quiet attention. I kept checking his face during the meeting, waiting for signs of judgment, but he didn't flinch once, not even during the heavier stories. When we finished, I went outside for air. He followed and asked if I had a minute. We sat on a bench across from the library entrance, next to the bike racks. He told me he needed to say something. He'd overheard my parents talking about me after a holiday dinner last year. My mom had laughed and called me a stray cat we can't get rid of. My dad had said I was just hanging around, waiting for guilt to kick in. Ray said the conversation stuck with him for months. Unkinshin, May. He felt sick about it, but at the time didn't know what to do. He said, "I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, but I knew it was wrong." He looked down when he said it, not in a performative way, more like he didn't want to look up until he got it all out. Then he added that watching the group tonight made him realize how many people he'd probably brushed off the same way. He wanted to change that, starting with me. I asked if he wanted to help out sometime. Maybe co-moderate a meeting? He didn't hesitate, just nodded and said, "If you'll have me." The next day, an email came through the group inbox. It was from one of the observers, someone I didn't know personally. She said she'd attended quietly the week before and wondered if she could bring her daughter. Her daughter was 17, had recently come out as bisexual, and had been kicked out by her grandparents, who were raising her. She was staying with a family friend now, but felt completely alone. I added a visitor chair. From then on, we always left one seat marked with a folded paper that just said, "You're welcome here." No name, no pressure. That week's meeting ended like usual, but 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hadn't heard her voice in months. She didn't ask how I was. She said a neighbor had told her I was running some kind of public therapy circle and accused me of poisoning people against the family. I didn't raise my voice. I told her clearly, it's not poison. It's fertilizer. It's for people who were tossed aside and still managed to grow. She hung up before I finished the sentence. I stared at the phone afterward, not because I was shocked, but because for the first time in years, I didn't feel that familiar squeeze in my chest. No panic, no spiral, just air, just silence. And it didn't scare me. The email came in 2 days before our next Thursday meeting. I saw it in the RSVP inbox we kept for visitor approvals. Just a name, no message. Samantha Tran, my sister. No one had heard from her in over a year, not since the family reunion I wasn't invited to. There was no warning, no follow-up, just her name on the list like she was any other curious stranger. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called an emergency video chat with our core team, Kelsey, Ray, and Darren, a moderator we'd brought on after the online branch started growing. We went over every possible angle, if she was there to start trouble, if she wanted a scene, if she'd try to bait me into reacting. We weren't sure. But we made a decision. We wouldn't block her. This was a support group. We didn't shut people out unless they gave us a reason. We agreed on rules. Kelsey would lead the meeting that night. I'd stay quiet, observe, and only step in if something crossed a line. Ray would sit near the door, just in case. Darren would monitor body language and chat logs from the virtual side. She showed up right on time. Business casual. Heels. A black notebook tucked under one arm. She didn't look nervous. She looked like she was here to observe a nonprofit. She smiled at the volunteer at the check-in table, took her seat near the front, and crossed her legs like she was settling in for a panel discussion. During the intro round, everyone gave a short sentence about why they were there. She passed. Just smiled and nodded. That alone made half the room glance at each other. Open discussions started like always. People spoke about hard conversations they'd had with relatives, choices they'd made to protect themselves, recent messages from old friends they didn't know how to answer. Midway through, my sister raised her hand and asked, "Have you ever wondered if maybe you're just too sensitive?" The air shifted. One of our newer members, Donnie, didn't even wait for a moderator. She turned to face Sam directly and said, "You don't get to gaslight people in a healing space. If that's what you came here to do, you're in the wrong room." Sam stayed calm. She tilted her head, pretending to be confused, then scribbled something in her notebook. I broke protocol. I raised my hand, then stood. I said, "That's my sister. I didn't invite her. She hasn't checked in on me since I moved out of our family's home. She didn't visit me in the hospital. She wasn't there when our parents told me I was a burden. She wasn't even at my last birthday. But she's here now, not to support anyone, but to fact-check what I'm saying." Sam interrupted. She said she came because she was concerned about the narrative I was pushing and wanted to offer another perspective. That's when the room changed completely. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just a long, steady silence. People slowly turned their chairs away from her. One woman pulled her daughter's chair a few inches closer, like shielding her from a cold breeze. Kelsey stepped in. She addressed Sam directly, keeping her tone calm but firm. She said the space was for people who came in good faith, not to challenge others' stories or protect their own reputation. If Sam wanted to participate, she could, but if she was only there to disprove something, she'd need to leave. Sam stood up. She tossed the notebook in her bag, didn't look at anyone, and said, "This was pathetic." Then she walked out. We ended the meeting early. People were tense, but not panicked. Some offered hugs. A few stayed behind to ask if I needed help with cleanup. Ray asked if I wanted to grab food, but I said I was fine. My hands were shaking as I packed up, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. Like something sharp had finally snapped and fallen off. The next morning, an email came in from Sam. The subject line was blank. The body just said, "You've made your point. Don't contact me again." I hadn't contacted her in years. I marked it as read and archived it. And then I blocked her email entirely. That door had already been closed, but now it was sealed for good. No message, no invite, no update would ever cross between us again. And that, strangely, felt like the cleanest ending I'd had with anyone in a long time. The name popped up on the Tuesday RSVP list, Calvin Park. I recognized it immediately. He worked with my father at the local college, some kind of department coordinator, always present at faculty events when I was younger. He used to come to our house for dinner once a year. My father would bring out his best scotch, and my mother would polish the silverware like she was expecting royalty. When I saw his name, I sat up straighter. My first thought was surveillance. Maybe my father had sent him. Maybe someone had heard about the group and wanted to collect details. I didn't say anything right away. I flagged the name for our core team and asked them to keep an eye on him during the session. Calvin arrived 15 minutes early. He was older than I remembered, with gray hair, thick glasses, and a slow gait. He walked with a cane, not unlike mine, and took a seat quietly near the center of the room. He greeted the volunteer with a kind voice and accepted the printed agenda without asking any questions. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't mention me. He said he'd become estranged from both his children after a bitter divorce. He talked about how pride and defensiveness had ruined everything, how he spent the last decade waiting for his kids to call, only to realize they were probably waiting for the same thing. His voice cracked once, but he stayed steady. After the meeting, he waited near the back while most people shuffled out. I was collecting name tags and gathering teacups when he stepped closer. He asked, gently, if I was Derek Tran's daughter. I nodded. There was no reason to lie. He looked stunned. He told me my father had said I moved away after college, somewhere out of state, that I'd taken a job doing overseas consulting, that I was doing great, that I'd finally found my stride. He looked confused, maybe even embarrassed. I told him I'd never left the city. Calvin blinked hard and leaned against the table. He said my father had even shown off a photo from a recent vacation I took to Spain. I've never been to Spain. The only trip I'd been on in years was a one-night Airbnb getaway with Kelsey and another moderator after we finished launching the satellite groups. Calvin rubbed his forehead and apologized for bringing it up. He said he hadn't known the truth. He thought I was running the group while working internationally, that I was sharing stories from abroad. I told him I'd been living in subsidized housing for the past year and a half, trying to afford physical therapy while doing freelance writing on the side. He apologized again. I told him he didn't owe me one. The next day, I brought it to our Thursday group. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid out the facts. That my father hadn't just cut me out, he'd replaced me with someone who didn't exist. A fake daughter who was successful, independent, emotionally stable, and living far away. He'd given her my name, my face, and filled in the rest with whatever made him sound like a proud father. No one interrupted. People sat in silence, just absorbing. One member said, "That's not just denial, that's fabrication." Another whispered, "That feels like losing a person twice." Ray leaned forward and tapped the table once. He said, "This is identity theft, honestly, like emotional forgery." Later that night, I searched the college's website. I found an old faculty newsletter with a blurb written by my father. It read, "My daughter is currently consulting on an eco-design initiative in Spain. She always had a global mindset." I clicked through the photo attached. It was me. But from 5 years ago. From a family beach trip I barely remembered, long before the accident, long before everything fell apart. He'd cropped the others out and used it like it was recent. I dropped it in the Discord thread for context. Within minutes, the chat exploded. Other members started sharing stories. One said their father told coworkers they were living in Germany. They were actually in a shelter an hour from home. Another said her mother invented a fake wedding for her to avoid answering questions about her real relationship. Some had been rewritten as dead, others as doctors. One member had an obituary printed without their knowledge. Someone suggested an idea, a panel. It's a public one. Not to shame anyone. To shame anyone. Just to reclaim space. We could call it Estranged Voices, the stories behind the silences. A few local community centers had open slots for weekend events. One member offered to design the flyers. Another had a contact who could lend folding chairs and a projector. I didn't say yes right away. Public speaking wasn't something I'd done since college presentations. But I said I'd help organize. I'd manage logistics. I'd help coordinate sessions and speakers. I wasn't ready to stand on stage just yet, but I was ready to stop being invisible, even if it made the people who erased me uncomfortable. We booked the room 3 weeks in advance, a neutral community center tucked between a library and a medical clinic, nothing fancy. It had foldable chairs, a decent sound system, and big windows that let the late afternoon light pour in. We called the event an open mic for the estranged. No tickets, no live stream, just an open door and a few printed flyers left in coffee shops and grocery store bulletin boards. The speaker list came together faster than expected. Kelsey offered to read a personal letter she'd written to her younger self, the one who thought keeping the peace meant giving up her voice. A woman named Nora signed up next. She'd been ghosted by her entire family after converting religions at 22. And Ray, even though he didn't identify as estranged himself, asked if he could speak as an ally, someone who stayed silent too long and learned better. My job was to MC. I didn't plan to share anything personal yet. Just keep things moving, welcome people, explain the mission of our group, and make sure no one went over time. I printed the schedule on cardstock and brought a box of chamomile tea, just in case nerves got too high. We expected maybe 15 people. Over 40 showed up. Some came alone, others in pairs. A few clutched folded sheets of paper or notebooks. One woman stood in the corner for 20 minutes before sitting down. By the time I stepped up to the mic, 2 people in the second row were already crying. The event started smoothly. Kelsey read first, clear, steady, powerful. Nora followed, her voice shaking once but never stopping. Ray spoke next, and his story landed harder than any of us expected. He talked about the night he heard my parents mocking me and said, "Silence is never neutral. It's just invisible loyalty." People clapped. People hugged. One man offered to donate snacks for future events. A former therapist who now ran a local grief circle approached during intermission and asked if we'd be open to a quiet collaboration, no public panels, thus, just shared space for those in mourning, whether from death or disconnection. Then I saw her, near the back wall, standing with her hands clasped and a paper program folded in half, a mess. Callahan, my childhood piano teacher, she taught me from ages 6 to 16. She used to tape gold stars to my sheet music when I finally nailed a piece. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. She didn't speak, just waited until we made eye contact. Then she gave me a small smile and mouthed, "I'm proud of you." I had to turn away for a second to keep from losing it completely. Then right before we closed the night, a man stepped forward and asked if he could speak. We hadn't planned for last-minute additions, but he looked nervous enough that I gave him the mic. He introduced himself as Thomas. He said he was my sister's ex-boyfriend. No one moved. He explained that during their relationship, Sam used to talk about me constantly, but not in ways that made sense. She called me clingy, needy, overdramatic, said I used the accident for attention. Told him I would never amount to anything because I always needed someone to carry me. He looked down at the floor as he spoke, barely able to hold the mic steady. Then he said, "I believed her. I didn't know you, but I believed her. And I never questioned it." The room fell into this still, sharp silence. Even the HVAC system seemed to go quiet. I didn't make a speech. I just stepped forward, took the mic gently, and said, "I don't need apologies from the past. I just hope you don't believe people like that again." Thomas nodded. Then he asked if he could join the group. I told him yes, but only if he came to listen, not to unload guilt. We wrapped shortly after that. No music, no grand farewell. Just quiet clapping, a few lingering conversations, and the slow scraping of chairs being stacked. People helped clean without being asked. Someone passed out napkins. One woman stayed behind to sweep the floors even though she wasn't part of the team. That night back home, I didn't go straight to bed. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't touched since before the accident. Pages of birthday parties, piano recitals, school trips. For once, the girl in those photos didn't look like a stranger. She looked like someone who deserved to take up space. Someone still here. Before I went to sleep, I sent one more message. It was to my high school art teacher, the one who once told me, "If you ever feel invisible, come find me." I didn't expect her to reply. I didn't know if her number still worked. I didn't know if she still lived in town. But I hoped she meant it. A week after the open mic event, another RSVP came through the inbox. This one stopped me cold. Linda Cho, my high school art teacher, the one who used to let me stay after class to finish projects, who once told me, if you ever feel invisible, come find me. I hadn't spoken to her in over 10 years. I'd sent the invite on a whim, not even sure the email still worked. She showed up that Thursday, right on time. She looked older, with more gray in her hair and reading glasses now, but she still had that calm presence that filled a room without raising her voice. She sat quietly during the check-in round, took notes with a pencil on a tiny notepad, and didn't speak until the very end. After the session, she waited until the last person left, then walked up and hugged me. Not a stiff, polite hug, but the kind that says, I see you now and I should have seen you then. She pulled me aside and said, you were always the one who looked around before speaking. That's not fear, it's care. Later that week, she asked if she could volunteer, specifically with our youth members. We had just launched a division for teenagers and young adults navigating early estrangement. The group had grown so fast that we'd split it into local branches. Linda offered to mentor. She said she'd seen too many students fall through the cracks. Not again. With the growth came structure. We introduced a rotating leadership model so no one burned out. Kelsey built out a proper intake form. Ray designed a monthly newsletter with resource links and updates. Darren applied for a local community wellness grant, and we got it. It wasn't a lot, but enough to cover meeting space, transportation stipends, and care packages for new members. The second public event took place in a different space, a community hall with better lighting and a mic that didn't screech every time someone breathed near it. This time I was on the schedule. I read a piece I'd written late one night after a group meeting. I told the story of waking up in the hospital after the accident and hearing my mother say to a nurse, we weren't expecting this kind of long-term situation. I talked about how being called a burden wasn't always direct. It was in the sighs, the missed birthdays, the way no one looked at me the same after I needed help standing up. I said it out loud, slowly, like I was pulling thorns out, one by one. People cried, but not in a way that derailed anything. A young woman with crutches came up after and whispered, I've never heard someone say it out loud before. That night, I wrote a letter, not for closure, not for forgiveness, just for truth. It was 5 pages long. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't explain myself or try to make it poetic. I told the story from beginning to end. The accident, the recovery, the house that went quiet, the reunion I wasn't invited to, the fake stories my father told, the silence that spoke louder than any insult. I printed it, folded it neatly, and mailed one copy to each of them, my parents, my sister, and my younger brother. A week later, responses came trickling in. My mother sent back a small envelope with one sentence, sorry you feel that way. My brother, who I hadn't heard from in months, suddenly texted, you really love attention, huh? I blocked him right after. I didn't reply to my mother either. My father never responded at all. At the next Thursday meeting, Ray pulled me aside. He told me he overheard his own parents questioning one of my father's stories during dinner. Apparently, my father told someone I was consulting in France now. His mother frowned and asked, didn't she hurt her leg in a crash? His father didn't answer. They weren't ready to confront him. But the story wasn't sitting clean anymore. On New Year's Eve, we hosted a dinner for group members who had nowhere else to go. We cooked in shifts, brought folding tables, and decorated with cheap string lights. 30 people came. Someone brought board games. Someone else brought an old karaoke machine that barely worked. At one point, we passed around a box of family photos people had donated from thrift stores. We rewrote the captions, funny ones, healing ones, absurd ones. Someone held up a wedding photo and wrote, just divorced my cousin and feeling cute. Laughter filled the room. That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were stacked in the kitchen sink, I sat on my couch and looked through my old photo album again. For once, I didn't feel like I was flipping through the life of a stranger. I used to think the worst thing that ever happened to me was the accident, but it wasn't. The worst thing was learning how easy it was for people I loved to stop loving me the second I needed something from them. But now I have people who stayed, people who saw the worst and didn't turn away. And that's the story I want to be remembered for.